Words are used in the Quran a number of times which seem to be deliberate. For example, the word for month in the Quran, shahr, is used in the singular exactly 12 times. Now you might say that's a coincidence, and if that's the only thing we said, we will say yes, it must be a coincidence, but there is more. The word for day, yawm in Arabic, in the singular, without any suffixes, is used exactly 365 times. Now is that also a coincidence? Now there is more. The Quran tells us that Isa alayhi salam is like Adam in the sight of Allah. Inna mathala Isa inda Allahi kamathali Adam. The example of Jesus in the sight of Allah is like the example of Adam. خَلَقَهُ مِن تُرَابٍ ثُمَّ قَالَ لَهُ كُن فَيَكُونُ. Allah created him from dust and then said to him, be, and he became. So that's a similarity. Allah created them both, right? But it is interesting from a mathematical point of view to recognize that both names, Isa and Adam, occur in the Quran 25 times each. So somebody was doing the counting and making sure, and there are more examples like this, but I want to focus on this and go a little bit deeper now. The Quran, in the 74th chapter, the 30th ayah, says, عَلَيْهَا تِسْعَةَ عَشَرَ. Over it are 19. And this is a mention of the 19 angels that guard the hellfire. But sometimes people wanted to think about this 19 and ask, why is it mentioned with such prominence? Because the next verse, the 31st verse of the 74th chapter, goes into great detail about this, saying that the mention of this 19 angels will fortify the faith of the believers, so that even the people of the book will no longer doubt. So why this 19? Now that's the question, so leave that aside for the moment, and I will come back to it. The Quran also says, in the 15th surah, Surah Al-Hijr, in the 87th ayah, وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَاكَ سَبْعًا مِنَ الْمَثَانِ وَالْقُرْآنَ الْعَظِيمِ. We have given you 7 of the oft-repeated things and the grand Quran. So what is the 7 oft-repeated things? The Mufassirun deliberated about this. Some say it is Surah Al-Fatiha. But why does it say the 7 oft-repeated and the grand Quran? As if the grand Quran is something else other than Surah Al-Fatiha. Surah Al-Fatiha is included in the grand Quran, right? So there is a puzzle there. So we have the puzzle about the 7, we have the puzzle about the 19. Now, how many times did we say that Isa alayhi salam is mentioned in the Quran? 25 times. And Adam is mentioned in the Quran? 25 times. Some surahs mention Isa alayhi salam but do not mention Adam. Some mention Adam alayhi salam but do not mention Isa alayhi salam. Now when we see where they're mentioned, we see that they're mentioned in the 2nd surah, the 3rd surah, and so on. When in the 3rd surah, they are mentioned in that verse which says that one is like the other. That's the 59th verse of Surah Al Imran. That happens to be the 7th time that each name is mentioned in the Quran. Sometimes a verse mentions Isa but doesn't mention Adam. A verse mentions Adam but doesn't mention Isa. But in that verse, that is the 7th time. So it's like they're apart and then they coincide. Then they do not occur in the same surah again. Some surahs mention Adam, some surahs mention Isa, until they coincide again in Surah Maryam. And Surah Maryam is the 19th surah of the Quran, as you know. So they coincided for the 7th time, and now they coincide also for the 19th time. Now, let's think about 7 and 19 and the relationship with 25. Pick 7 fingers, any 7 fingers, and let's count. And let's go, so those are your 7 fingers, all right? 7 fingers. So let's go 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. Now, if you start with that and you go the opposite way, you will realize that if you count backwards, the 19 and the 25 coincide with the 7. So 25, 24, 23, 22, 21, 20, 19. So the 19 and the 7 coincide. That means that when Isa alayhi salam is mentioned for the 7th time in the Quran, that is the 19th time from the end. And when he is mentioned the 19th time, that is the 7th time from the end. And the same thing we can say about Adam alayhi salam. The 7th time he is mentioned in the Quran, that's the 19th time from the reverse. And the 19th time he is mentioned, that is the 7th time from the reverse. I have to end very quickly now. But the last point about this is that if we look up the verses where Isa alayhi salam is mentioned for the first 19 times in the Quran, and we add up those verses, the total is 1957. And that happens to be a product of 19. It is 19 times 103. Now this number 1957 is a very unique number. You don't expect that you will come across that number again. And yet, if you count the verses where Adam alayhi salam is mentioned from the 7th time to the 19th time where Adam alayhi salam is mentioned, the total number of verses is also 1957, which is 19 times 103 again. That means you go from the 3rd surah, you're asking how many verses occur from the time Adam is mentioned in that 3rd surah to the time he's mentioned in the 19th surah, and the total number of verses is 1957. Who was counting all of this to make sure it comes out like this? This is only Allah Azza wa Jal. No human being did this prior to the age of computers. It is only now that we can see this and realize that the Quran is a revelation from the Almighty.